Look upon me. Past my silken vestments, past my bandages, stained with rot. My body is broken. My soul is tainted by a life of pain. The Weaver's new world will not suffer such tragedy. She is weaving me a new body, a new soul, fit for her perfect world. Join me in the salvation of her web.
Alright, folks, Hardcore Zombie back with a brand new video for you in regards to the brand new cycle for Last Epoch. This particular season for Last Epoch for me has been quite successful so far. I've been really enjoying my character, and as of the time of recording, my character is currently pushing into early monoliths at level 70 in hardcore. I went for a minion build this particular patch just because I felt like it, and it's usually my comfort build when it comes to playing hardcore for the most part. So, with that being said, I chose to go with the Primalist and then choosing Beastmaster as my mastery. And in this particular case, my build here is doing primarily physical damage, scaling with bleed, armor shred, etc. Throughout my time in the campaign, it hasn't been really anything too difficult for me. I'm relatively used to the stuff in the campaign by now. However, there's still the typical things that you do have to watch out for. Either way, though, everybody plays the game in their own different way. For myself, I tend to take things very slowly, and I just tend to make sure that I'm a little bit over leveled by the time I'm at a major boss or a major event within the story of the campaign itself. So it's a little bit easier, but it also comes down to what type of build you're going for and how much life you ultimately have, because that's the major contributing factor to keeping yourself alive in hardcore. Upcoming boss here, I was quite surprised because I originally didn't really want to use swipe for this character, but I found out quite easily early on that using swipe was really nice, because like this boss here, he just went down in like a matter of seconds just from the calm strike within the swipe tree from that. So, and as you see, it was over on screen for like mere seconds. Anyway, now we're back on to fighting, going on towards Lilith and Legon. These two fights are relatively challenging depending on your character, but either way, they're not too bad as long as you have your resistances capped, especially your physical, your lightning, and your cold damage. With Lilith, personally, I don't really think she's that big of a deal. tends to be more annoying than anything else, just because she tends to teleport around everywhere, which is why it's very important to have a movement skill in a lot of these cases for these types of scenarios where you're dealing with a boss that's just moving around all over the place every like 2 seconds. But it's not too bad dealing with her. It's one of those things where as long as you're prepared, she's not much of a threat at all. Even when they had the barriers and stuff in for the extra health bars for the bosses during the campaign, I didn't encounter much of a problem. Now for one of my personal favorite bosses in this game, Lagon, or as I like to call him, Big Cthulhu's Squid Man that has tentacles that he tries to slap you with. Even though for the most part, with this guy, he's like so big, he couldn't even in size comparison, you're like an ant to him. But either way, this guy tends to be pretty challenging for everybody. If you don't know certain ways to choose him, like in the corner for example, it can be a bit of a challenge to even get to him in the first place. It's a whole nother thing entirely dealing with his hybrid damage between his cold damage, his lightning damage, and his physical damage. Not to mention all of his big AoE slams and stuns and all that sort of thing. Probably the only thing that makes this boss a little bit easier is probably the middle section where you're having to beat up the tentacles a little bit and you have some time to recover. If it wasn't for this section though, it would be a much more difficult boss. But even so, this is like the first time where I've legitimately killed him in hardcore and I felt great doing so. I tend to avoid fighting Majasa early on. I prefer to go off into early maps and get a couple level scores because pretty much the same reason as Lagon. However, with Majasa, she's a lot faster, and if you are under leveled, you're most likely dead if you try to fight her too early, unless you really get lucky and you know what you're doing. Because the fact that she also deals a variety of different damage, especially when that second fight hits, it's way more difficult. That was just a little side note that I wanted to say here, because overall, mapping and doing your monoliths is really fun, and I like what they've been doing with the new season so far, with going into the tombs and being able to upgrade your idols and craft a little bit extra on them to juice them up really nicely, and it gives a lot more of different things to chase for and different items to look out for throughout the campaign rather than just looking for specific needs and things like that. Because honestly, like, chase items are great, but they're only good if they serve a purpose. Otherwise, they just end up in the inventory waiting until when you decide to finally either get rid of it or you decide to finally use it for like a joke or a meme little type of thing. Just to see how it works. And always be in a habit of double checking throughout the campaign and throughout your time if you're playing any game in hardcore mode. To always make sure that things are exactly the way you want it, because there's not a whole lot of room for error, but there is room for flexibility. That's why I just decided to check my actual skill tree and see if there was anything extra that I wanted to take, but I just needed some extra strength at the time anyway. Which Last Epoch gives you a lot of flexibility for respecting. Anyway, so you have lots of different options. Major goals when you start getting into Monolith is looking for those little upgrades in gear, even if it seems to be a minute upgrade. Always go for it, because little things like that in hardcore make the difference between you staying alive and the character no longer being a hardcore character. So always be on the lookout for those little types of items and those little upgrades, especially anything that reduces critical strikes with extra armor or critical strike avoidance is very valuable versus actually going for extra damage, because extra damage isn't going to help to keep you staying alive in hardcore, that's for sure. think of the tombs like an extension to your actual monolith. Because when you actually go inside the tombs, like I am here, it's literally an extension of what that monolith normally is. The only thing that I've seen that might be a bit of a challenge for some people is the fact that it's very close quarters in this little side area where you do get your idol upgrades for your character here, as well as some of the enemies can be a little bit challenging, but you just have to be paying attention and making sure you're not getting hit too much. But overall, this has been a really good experience with this new patch, and I've been really enjoying all the chase items and everything in this patch. Unfortunately, I didn't fully record everything here in terms of like actually physically going to the after and little things like that. I'll end up doing that in another video to cover it. But for now, I'm pretty sure that this little bit of an explanation should suffice for most people. There's something I'd like to address, and it's something that I found out fairly early on during my campaign, and that I started to realize. You can sit there trying to think about what the perfect gear is, but in reality there's no such thing as perfect gear. The only thing that really helped where I got lucky was I ended up getting a Titan's Heart early with a +9 to my strength. And overall, it's a really good item, and I've been enjoying using it. I'm mainly using it for the extra damage reduction. However, the extra flat percentage health is really nice for it as well. Plus, I am running a two-handed weapon build, so it just fits really well, and I'm glad that I picked it up and that I found it while I was going through the campaign relatively early on. That was probably around the time when I was like level 40 with this character that I found the Titan Heart, something like that. But yeah, you always gotta keep your eyes peeled for certain little things on the ground, and it's always better to have a loot filter that you customize yourself, as opposed to trying to go with what somebody says. Because, yeah, sometimes you can say it's a bit annoying to look on the ground for that extra 2 seconds to read an item, but those 2 seconds in hardcore, when you take the time to really look at something, it's the difference between getting to that next level and beating that next boss, or just not being in hardcore anymore. So it's entirely up to you, but I've always ran with the idea that a loot filter is good if you can actually use it to supplement what you look for in items yourself to begin with. Having it do it for you isn't necessarily the best idea for everybody, and certainly that was never the case for myself. And I rarely ever use loot filters. The only reason why I started using one for Last Epoch is just because it's easy to use, it's built in game, and it's really convenient. originally planning on fighting Najasa at like level 70 because I wanted to be really careful with this boss in particular because Najasa is no slouch in terms of the boss by any means. However, you don't necessarily have to overlevel like I do, but it's just at a personal preference that I tend to overlevel just a little bit. Especially because I'm playing hardcore, I don't want to have to deal with dying or anything like that, so I'm better off to be safe than sorry, that's what I say. Especially in hardcore. Always be safe, don't be sorry.
What do you think you're doing, my beautiful vessel maiden?
I am breaking the cycle. I refuse to be your sacrifice.
Disgraceful. Red is unbecoming of you, child.
This is not today. For millennia, the vessel maidens have died so you could live. Now feel the unending abyss of their despair.
What are you doing?
Why don't you show our guests the torment that now fills you?
What's happening? Get out of my mind!
Majasa tends to be one of the most challenging bosses in the campaign, so over-leveling for her is generally a good idea. Even though it does make her seem not as difficult to defeat or anything like that. By far, it's not anywhere clear close to the case, because at this point here I've been like 10 levels over, so I figured I might as well just show off a bit and show you guys how well the build is doing. For the most part, Majasa is Majasa. So, as long as you're careful and over level a little bit, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. I've been really impressed with this build so far for this new patch, for the new cycle for Last Epoch. Even for this guy here, he hasn't put up too much of a challenge, but there was a couple moments here where I was like on the edge of my seat, so to speak. But overall, I've been really happy with the build, and it's really strong. I will at some point come out for a quick video for a build guide for this character, but as far as a long form video like this, if you like this sort of content, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. I mainly just wanted to do these videos just to kind of express my love for gaming, express my love for playing hardcore in these types of games in general, because why not? It's fun and I enjoy doing it, so I might as well share that with others too. And I hope you feel the same as well.